Well, hello again, all my YouTubers, and thanks to you all for taking the time to return to Classic Dirt Bike TV. And thanks to each and every one of you for the many positive comments that you're leaving with regards my video content, and also thanks to the many people who are leaving negative comments. This, of course, also helps me build a much better channel, and obviously that leads to a much better viewing experience for my YouTubers. So thanks to each and every one of you for the many comments. Okay, we've been raiding the video archives once again, and we have another very good selection of old classics from back in the day for you to have a look at. So without any further delay, let's just jump straight into our first machine. Okay, first up we're going to take a look at Rab Weldon's quite nice 490 Maico. Now this bike's of course not your standard Maico red, as you can see here, but is decked out in this black livery, which I think personally is a colour that kind of suits these old German twin shockers, and this bike's got the 1981 Maico frame, but the later motor, which I think could be from an 82 or even an 83 bike, so it's not a fully standard Maico machine. And Rob's bike has a quite good collection of upgrades fitted on it, including this Maico only expansion chamber. Now, as you know, these later 490 motors did away with the old Maico primary chain that connected the clutch to the crankshaft, and this new combination was now gear driven, which was of course much better and more reliable, although essentially much of the rest of this engine's quite the same as the original 81 bike, apart from that new upgrade. But certainly a big brute of a motor, and these engines could push out plenty horses from that reed valve engine. And again, a nice pair of quality piggyback gas shocks on Rab's Maico, which looked like a nice pair of Öhlins that appear to have been serviced at Dunfermline Motorcycles, going by those K-Tech stickers on the gas bottles. Although, mind you, I think that this particular Maico could have been a Maico only bike at one time, going by the exhaust and the other alloy parts that are fitted on this bike, because as you know, Maico only were the kings of bling when they were on the go, and they sold some of the shiniest Maico motorcycles that you're likely to see, although these weren't cheap, and you had to have a big bag of cash handy if you wanted to buy one. And although if you're a owner or rider of one of these 490 Maicos, you'll know that to get the best from these big machines, you had to ride them hard and ride them fast, and keep that engine in the top half of the rev band just to keep it running nice and clean. Of course, that was more important with the older piston port motors, although these reed valve engines are a bit more forgiving if you ride them in the lower half of the power band. But nevertheless, this Black Beauty of Rab's is a quite nice looking bike, and quick, as you're no doubt aware, although if you're not into having your Maico painted black, then maybe you'd like this blue version instead. Now this bike is another Rab Weldon Maico twin shocker, and this time with the blue plastics and new graphics. And this example was almost definitely an ex-Maico only bike, with its blue talon wheels, chromed expansion chamber and alloy swing arm. Now again, this later Maico 490 motor, or 500 as it states on the side panel, so I can only venture that the engine's been bored out to the full capacity at one time, or it could just be that putting a 500 badge on the bike makes it look better and subsequently sell better than the original 490cc graphics. Now back in the day, chroming exhaust pipes was a Maico only trademark at the time on their motocross bikes, although I'm not really sure as to why you would want to chrome a dirt bike exhaust pipe that's going to get hammered by stones and dirt, but again, I suppose it was all done just to make the bikes look really nice for those pre-sales pictures. But nevertheless, I expect the pipe still did its job, and to be fair, it does give the bike a bit of a look. But if you like your old twin shockers to be powerful and a bit on the fast side, then these old Maicos are certainly the bike for you. Not everybody, of course, can ride these big open class race bikes, and certainly not everybody can ride them to their full potential, but if you put the right rider on board one of these big 490s, and if you've got the suspension and engine settings just right, then these are still highly competitive bikes, even in this modern day. Although I have to say, a nice combination there of Rab Weldon twin shockers, but why have just one big Maico in your collection when you can have two in different colours? Okay, this next bike is an Italian made FV250 Moto Villa, and again a quite rare bike for the UK, although these did sell in very good numbers around Europe in the early 1980s. Now, although these old Villas are maybe not that well known, these were still quite good bikes and had a good reputation for big power and reliability. But Moto Villa were another of the small Italian motorcycle manufacturers of the 1980s, and was started by motorcycle racer and engineer Francesco Villa in 1965, and not only had they enjoyed success in enduro and motocross events, but they had a lot of successes at road racing as well. Now, these piston port two-stroke motors not only powered off-road bikes, but they were widely used and very successful as power plants for kart racing because of their lightweight and overall power. But they were also compact little engines, and if you had a bike that had its suspension all sorted and the fueling was just right in the engine, then these 250 bikes could certainly fly around a racetrack. Now, I'm sure that this particular model of Villa still had an alloy fuel tank fitted, although I'm sure Villa then moved on to a plastic fuel cell on their MX-1 bikes that they built in 1981. Now, I know a couple of riders who have raced these old Villa twin shockers, and they both commented that these were still good little bikes to ride, although they maybe lacked the quality engineering that was in a Japanese machine, but for a smaller European motorcycle builder, these were still very good sellers. But again, it's just great to be able to take a look at one of these lesser well-known bike manufacturers and some of the models that they produced, because before the Japanese began flooding the market with cheaper and some would argue better products, Italy still had quite a few small firms building these dirt bikes in the early 1980s, and with the likes of TGM, Moto Gori and even Ancelotti were all making motocross bikes at that time. But this is certainly another rare and very nice looking 250 Moto Villa Italian stallion. Okay, next on the list is a quite nice looking 1980 RM250 Suzuki. Again, another good bike from Suzuki, and the very last of the Suzuki twin shock motocrossers, because of course Suzuki then moved on to the monoshock and water cooled RM125 in 1981. And this bike certainly looks like a nice example, although it does have different rear shocks from the original factory specifications. But then again, it's what you'd expect from a bike that's now over 40 years old. But these were still a very good race bike from Suzuki for 1980. Okay, it's never going to scare you out of your wits because it's just a 250 bike, although for a good club rider with decent riding skills, these RM250s were still a good all-rounder and performed really well on the track. Now the front forks were again decent, albeit a bit on the soft side, but as long as you weren't doing any serious airtime over the jumps, then these forks were adequate. A plastic fuel tank again on these 80 bikes, and they also had quite good stoppers at the rear and a light alloy box section swing arm that again was strong and was connected to a pair of twin shock suspension units at the rear. But for a conventional old twin shock system, this was as good as you could get for the time. And these old RM race seats were quite plush for the period and were a good place to put your backside down on when you were heading down the straightaway. But in terms of their aesthetic looks, these RMs were one of the nicer looking bikes of their time, and when you wandered around the racing paddocks back in the day and you came across these yellow pearls at a distance, then you knew instantly that you were coming up against an RM Suzuki of some description. But once again, another lovely bike and a very good weekend racer, a lovely 1980 RM250 Suzuki. Okay, to finish off, let's take a close look at this very nice 1983 YZ125 Yamaha that I spotted at the 2020 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show. Now, when these little YZ125 Screamers came out in 1983, there were two versions. The white bikes with the red pinstripes on the tank were the European models, while this yellow bike with the black graphics was made for sale predominantly in the USA. Now, our featured bike is, I don't think entirely original, but it's still a little beauty, that's for sure. And when these machines first hit the motocross tracks of the world, they were one of the best 125s that you could lay your hands on. Now, they had good suspension front and back. They also had drum brakes on the front and at the rear, and a small but very compact liquid cooled power valved two-stroke motor that was just simply a joy to ride. And considering its dimensions and size, this little motor could certainly pack a punch for just a small 125 two-stroke engine. Now, as far as I'm led to believe, it had a 6-speed gearbox, and these of course were liquid cooled engines and had a bore of 56mm and a relatively short stroke of 50mm, and normally the engine was fed its fuel through a 34mm Mikuni carb and reed valve block. Now, as you know, Yamaha again were one of the first bike manufacturers to fit a power valve onto a production two-stroke motocrosser, and the version fitted into this 125 YZ worked reasonably well. But in terms of the engine's performance, this little power plant's horses were really all stacked in the mid-range, and from the bottom to that sweet spot of the mid-range was where this motor certainly gave her best, although once she got past the sweet spot, she kind of ran out of puff a bit. But you still have to remember that this was still just a 125 engine. Also, these 83 YZs were fitted with Yamaha's single monocross suspension system, which again worked very well for an 83 design, although for a bike that only weighed in at around 190 pounds, it was still light enough for even the smallest of riders to throw around. Now, on the day of the Telford show, I don't think this bike was actually being offered for sale on the day, because I never really saw a price tag, and besides, if you had one of these little screamers in your workshop you'd probably want to hold on to anyhow, because as I remember, these were very popular bikes with young and even older riders back in the day, and are much still sought after even here in 2021. But again, another iconic little racer, and when Yamaha brought out the 1984 YZ125 a year later, it just wasn't a patch on this 1983 bike, and some journalists of the time even commented that the newer 84 125 was so slow that it couldn't even compete against the 80cc class bikes. And so if you're in the market for a vintage 125 YZ, then this is the bike to look for, because just take this little buzz bomb out for a few laps and it'll take you a week to wipe the grin off your face. Well, I hope you enjoyed that latest selection of old classics from my video archives, and I hope you enjoyed having a quick look around them. Now, coming up in my next video posting, we're going classic racing once again, and we'll be showcasing racing footage from the 2015 Motocross the Nations event that was held at Butterfield in Reading in that year. So if you were in attendance at that event, or better still, even raced at that event, then look closely at the racing footage coming up, because who knows, you may have captured yourself on film. So anyway, until the next time, stay safe and well, and we'll speak again very soon when we all return to Classic Dirt Bike TV.